So 2025, we're going to actually hit an interesting milestone. We will welcome our 1 millionth refugee into Australia.
That's correct.
And in Australia, there are 8.6 million of us, 32% of the population, who are actually born overseas. And more than 50% of us who were either born overseas or have a parent who was born overseas. So we are quite a multicultural country, are we not?
Indeed we are. Yes, absolutely.
I'm Nikki Sloan, and I'm coming to you today from the beautiful lands of the Dharawal people to bring you Community Matters, the podcast that explores current issues in our community with people who are making a difference. And today I'm joined by Allyson Pazos from our wonderful member organisation, Multicultural Communities Council of the Illawarra, which I will henceforth call MCCI. MCCI is a wonderful advocate organisation and service organisation, and they are celebrating their 50th anniversary this year. So congratulations to MCCI. Allyson has been working for many years with people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, which we will now call CALD backgrounds, successfully particularly leading regional youth and community programs. Welcome, Allyson.
Thank you, Nick. It's lovely to be here.
Yeah, so that number is really significant, our millionth person from a refugee background.
That is correct. We're looking at it. I think the latest update was towards the end of the year, but it is a really big and important milestone for our community and our country.
Tell me about welcoming people, particularly from refugee backgrounds, into the country. And I imagine it's not easy for those people to come in. What are some of those systemic barriers? What are some of those cultural barriers? What are some of those social barriers that those people might face when coming into this beautiful but new and very different country?
And it's such a big question, right? I think when we look at barriers, and the three that you just asked me, is, in terms of systemic and social and connections, there's so many layers that one needs to take into account. So if we're going to focus specifically now talking about former refugees, and I will call them former refugees, when someone arrives to the country, they no longer carry that label. It's not a label that go on for the rest of their lives. It shouldn't be something that identifies them unless they choose to. But you'll hear me talking about former refugees as a way to referring to those who had been granted access to Australia through a humanitarian entrant program, which is the refugee program and the settlement program. So they come usually with a background that has been impacted by war or forced displacement. We know that the social capital of those individuals and families have been broken down to a minimum. And by that, I mean the connections that individuals have amongst others, peers, families, but also institutions and the more if you like, hierarchical, the government and the groups of dynamic peoples that people connect. And we tend to do that as humans, and that's what keeps us well. So the impact of the refugee experience has broken all of that. So in terms of social connections and settling, there is a misconception that people will be extremely happy and ready to settle. They've come to a place where they're meant to be safe, and they indeed are, but they're carrying with them a lot of previous trauma. They're coming into a place where they're not used to, the systems are new. They might have lost family members. They might be survivors of trauma and torture. They must have witnessed things that, I can't even imagine, as an example. So the expectation that they will settle into our systems from the day one, it's unreasonable. Nobody could really do that. And so that's so our role is, and some of those barriers are, to be able to break down those social connection barriers and do not make the assumption that just by being here, we will able just to go and connect and live lives without supports around it. And that might look like connecting to, clubs and helping to school and organising healthcare and how to navigate that and meeting your next door neighbour or a friendly face. And it's also beyond language support, which is another barrier. And we pretty quickly go and said, oh, this is probably the biggest of barriers, but it's one of many, as an example. So that's in terms of the social connectedness, maybe, that I will invite everybody to stop and think and go, how would I feel if I all of a sudden become part of this environment? I've got the willingness and the desire to be part of it, but I don't have the tools yet or the confidence because it's been broken down. How do I build those connections so that I can thrive? So that's the first foundation, I suppose, for that that effective connectedness that we're looking at.
So we've all got a role to play in that connectedness, really.
Completely.
We do. And we have to think, I think, that, as you say, people are coming perhaps from a situation of war. They're perhaps been forced, probably been forced from their homes. But some people have spent 20 years living in refugee camps. I mean, what should we be doing as community members to welcome, help and support them?
I think being aware of that is really important, and you nail it when you say that some people have been in refugee camps all of their lives, and there could have been 30 years, could have been more. There is a difference between being an urban refugee, so they might have fled their countries and been and had resettled in a city for a little while, and their experience is going to be completely different to those who perhaps are in what most people imagine as a refugee camp, quite dire, quite precarious. And we have a combination of all of those differences, right? So they come in with those whatever skills and strengths and experiences they have. And if I was to recognize or identify perhaps some of those barriers, and one that comes to mind just as I was hearing you ask Nicky the question is, so the digital literacy, for example, is something that is really being difficult for people to navigate, and yet something that is embedded in all of our systems. So if I was to think of a system barrier to access health, we do appointments online, to access departmental and government forms, to look for reunification of other family members who might be still overseas, we need to do 3 or whatever many forms online. We need our devices to be able to authenticate who we are. And imagine they put us back into 30 years being in a refugee camp and all of a sudden expecting us to navigate that, which I find it somehow complex at times, let alone if you have a deficit in that experience and knowledge. So digital literacy, it's really important. It's one of the biggest barriers, I think, that then carries across many other areas of accessing health, accessing education, accessing employment, even applying for the rental property for your house. So we live in a digital world. So from the word go, that's something that we need to consider. So awareness, I guess, is something that I would invite people to think about as they engage and set up businesses and set up opportunities and liaise with children and young people in schools, that some of those given knowledge, I guess, and experiences that we might think people have perhaps might not necessarily hold true in those situations.
It's a really good example of why settlement services and other community services are so important to supporting people. We can't just say, here you are, you're in the country, go your hardest.
Completely.
Do people feel welcomed? The people you work with, do they feel welcomed into the country?
I think so. I'd say they do. Again, as I think I mentioned briefly before, there's this willingness and happiness and excitement. I mean, we all thrive to live a happy life in a safe environment, to provide for our loved ones. So having getting, I suppose, that opportunity, it is valued and is appreciated. And it's a reason why a lot of people then go back and work in community again, because it's a sense of wanting to give back, right? So that is the welcoming. That is reciprocated, is seen, and we hear it. So my answer is yes. And look, we get we get lots of beautiful positive feedback coming back to the organisation, and that's seen by actions. You know, the food that someone might bake for us, the invitation to be part of someone's wedding because we've been part of the settlement journey, or the graduation when they achieve, you know, studies at university. So those little things are the things that they show us day in and day out, that people do feel welcome and privileged to be here.
So they've come into the country, they're feeling welcomed. How about jobs? How easy is it to get a job if you are a former refugee?
Yeah, look, and that's again another that is a hot topic, I guess. We all want to live a life again that is meaningful, that we do with dignity, and jobs play a really important role in that. So I think there is a systemic barrier, and there's something that needs to happen in terms of our, you know, perhaps our policy at a very a general level, I guess, or high level, in terms of how do we recognize the skills and the qualifications of those who come from overseas. And that's something that the sector advocates, and it is advocating quite strongly. It is unfortunate. I think a last report I saw, and that was early on this week, over 600,000 people, immigrants in Australia, are working in jobs that are completely overqualified. So you might have doctors who are driving taxis, you might have engineers who are Uber drivers, and they're all very good jobs. But what that tells us is that we're not utilising the talent and the skills and that these people are able to contribute to our economy and to the well-being of everybody, but also to their own well-being at the sense of achievement and belonging. So there's an element there for those highly qualified and the skills that I think the system needs to work hard, I think, to recognise those. There's also, I guess, an invitation for prospective employers to be bold, to give people a chance, to understand that the skills that are acquired overseas are equally valuable and important, and they're not any lesser to the ones that someone will acquire here in Australia. So it's not a risk, I don't think. And it's not a deficit, it is a strength, because we are bringing a different layer of diversity. So an invitation to look out and to invite those skills to be part of those teams, small firms, and provide the opportunity. So those are for those who come with skills, and that's something that I feel it needs to happen, and it'd be really important. And then it's given opportunity to those who might not have the skills. You know, we spoke about others who have been in a situation where they've been disengaged with learning and employment for a very long time as a result of their migration and refugee journeys. And in those situations, is giving people the opportunity to utilize the skills as strengths. And I give you an example. I think it was late last year. We had a call out from Green Acres that they needed some assistance with a sewing project. And that was the project that came to MCCI. We very quickly, so there's often lots of, and I'll say ladies, I think most of them have been women who have really amazing skills about, you know, sewing and creating and doing things. And they bring those skills with them. We were able to be that liaison, to break or go over the barrier of language, to connect them with the organisation. And we had a group of women, mostly from African countries, who got employment sewing these items that they needed to happen, for example. So, and that's a perfect example of just putting the word out there and giving people opportunity, despite the fact that English might still be developing. They're new to the country, but they can work and they've got skills. So it's a win-win, I think. It
is really interesting, isn't it, that we have so many really qualified migrants and former refugees who are not, we are not using their qualifications, we're not using their experience as we should be doing. And it really makes me reflect that we need a better way than just saying you need to go back and do another 4 years. Okay, you're an engineer, but you've got to go back to uni and do another 4 years to prove you're an engineer. And surely there must be smarter ways of doing that, buddy systems, or You know, you have to do a 2-year period where you can only work under supervision, for example. It's better than, and you could be doing it on the job. You can be being paid for that instead of having to go to university and paying another $100,000 for your degree that you've already got.
You already got. I think that's, look, exactly, it's being creative. And those are the internal systems within existing organisations and firms that if we look at those and review them to make sure that they play to the strengths of this workforce that's ready to step in and contribute, then that's when we level the playing field, I guess, but also provide opportunities and meet those needs. I mean, there's shortages in many industries that we're struggling to get people to work in, and yet we have this workforce that's ready to step in. So yeah, I think being creative, being bold and taking those risks. And often I talk about switching shifting the switch rather, and looking at those things as strengths, not as deficits. If someone has an accent, it's not a deficit to that person. It is a strength. It's a token of knowledge of cross-cultural exposure. It's a token of knowledge of being able to decode language in your brain for more than one language. It is a strength. So rather than thinking this person's got an accent, it's difficult to understand, the invitation is to let's switch that around and see the strength and the positive that that token tells us of that person and play to those strengths. I think that's probably what I love to see more of. Yes. And I always think that people who are bilingual or multilingual, I just think how smart it is to think of something in your language and then translate it really quickly into a different language. And I don't think that's a skill I could do. No, and it's really difficult. Like it's often something that I start talking with young people when I first meet them and they feel, I'm new, I don't know, I'm a young person, I don't fit in, this is not what I want to be, I don't have enough knowledge. And then the question is, tell me about how many languages do you speak? And often it's 5. Geez, isn't that an amazing skill to have? So it's turning, it's that really true strength-based approach. And I don't expect everybody to kind of know that language and speak to that with confidence. We are in the community development sector and perhaps we do. But it's just being innovative, I guess, and creative and just opening up the your mind to other things and what those things might look like if you start embracing them. And look, that is what multiculturalism is based upon.
We are multicultural, whether we like it or not. So we need to work together to make it work.
Absolutely.
Speaking of things that work, something that we know is not working well in Australia is the housing sector, and certainly something we at Community Industry Group speak about very often. What is the experience of accessing housing for people who are coming in as migrants or former refugees?
And look, it is difficult for everyone out there to step into that market. So there are things in place through the formal settlement programs that are funded by government, and housing is one of those goals that we need to make sure people has, yes. But it reaches a point in that settlement period where they will need to enter the private market and they will need to search for houses and homes for themselves, just like everybody else. Some of those barriers, and I guess it's systemic, I suppose, and that adds to this complexity is, again, language, is that digital divide that I talked about, is the not having a history of previous rental. So we're talking that you're brand new to the country, right? Yet again, and I keep talking about invitations, but I challenge people to think about, you would look for the referees and previous history and whatnot, yet our refugee or former refugees settling into the country have gone through a really thorough check. So we know that they are, worthy to be Australians. We know that they have a lot to offer and that they are here because they have somebody, our programs have put them through these checks. So that should account, I think, for something, and it's probably something that could be used. And it's an education piece as well for the market. Real estate agents to understand that they're good people to have an offer, despite not having those. The evidence that you will require from someone who's been here all their lives. They can't produce that. They might not have the documents. They were left home, right, in that war-torn country. So it's just accommodating, again, things in our system to be able to support the community with their current needs.
I think that is such an important point because particularly, when we think about the rhetoric over the last 15 years or so, the rhetoric has been about former refugees are queue jumpers, criminals, they're terrorists. We've heard there's been some terrible rhetoric really, particularly in the media around that. Actually, they're not. They're really highly vetted, highly scrutinised and approved by the time they're approved to come here.
Absolutely. And I think that's a narrative we need to challenge. Out of all the things that we've spoken today, it is damaging, it's misinformation, and it isn't, it goes again against our very values of multiculturalism. We aim for a cohesive and united community. The narrative we hear, unfortunately, damages that. And we know that, there's something small and that's enough fuel to kind of go into conversations and narratives that are not, that don't contribute, I guess, in a positive way to anybody. And the damage that does to the people, right, who are navigating the systems as newly arrived. So, yes, there's been lots of checks. People come here with the best intention. And I go back to what I said before. We all strive for a happy and a life that's dignified, that we can provide for our loved ones, that we can protect them, that we're not different in any way. And that's what people strive for.
I think that couldn't be better. We are all the same underneath. And who wouldn't try anything to protect their family in dire circumstances? I know I would do anything for my children to keep them safe, and that might include putting them on a boat or whatever it is. I think we have to step into other people's shoes and think they've made the very best decisions they could for their family in terrible circumstances.
Completely. And it's even just the words of, being a queue jumper and being on boats and whatnot. I mean, it's false. There's a process that is quite thorough that people need to get through to be able to get here as a former refugee or a humanitarian entrant visa. So that's just not correct. It's been fueled, it's been said over and over again. A narrative that we really need to debunk is not correct. So, yeah, I guess that's just something that we really, I love everyone to be confident about, that that's not the case. And people become refugees not by choice, never by choice. Even their country of destination is not a choice. Families get broken up and go into different places in the world just for safety. So I think it's also understanding those circumstances that drive people out and just appealing to our humanity. It's just something that they found themselves in, and in most cases not fault of their own. It could be you and I in a different circumstance, and that's just how things roll sometimes.
I always think that. Always, there but for the grace, we could all be in those situations. And a message to everyone to challenge some of those, to really think about when we're watching the media, to really think about those stories and challenge some of those terrible narratives that we hear all the time.
Look, I think the last call maybe is just to talk about the value of civic society and organisations, how important they are in that inclusion and integration piece of work. And I'm talking about, the local organisations that are out there, Surf Life houses, our football organisations, the Rotaries, that they're all out there doing great work. We've been very fortunate to engage with them and provide so much for our communities. But the role they play into becoming an active player on that welcoming space is really important. And if I can share a couple of examples.
Please.
If we have a moment.
Please, yes.
There's been great work, and something that comes to mind is so we've got great volunteers, and a shout out to all of them that allow us to do the work that we do. But we connect very closely with the Surf Life Saving New South Wales, and they do a lot of work in terms of making sure that we build the capacity around water safety, which is really important, particularly where we live, but also that that we engage people who have never been part of or understand it. So the assumption that everyone swims in Australia, let me tell you, that's not correct, and that it's a very icon of the Australian culture. Difficult to break in if you are not part of the club, if you look different, if you carry an accent. I cannot tell you how many times I get asked at my local beach where I come from, and it's like, oh, buddy, I've been living here for 20 years, right? So it's not uncommon. And there's no ill intention in that. It's just curiosity, right? But anyhow, the work I wanted to tell you about, we've got this amazing volunteer. He does lots of programs for us, supports us in all of that, but he also happens to be closely connected to the Surf Life house or club in Wombarra and Caldwell. So he mobilises his own community. And once a year, we have this event where we just bring all these families with the children. They've got a session, a nipper session at the beach. They play, they eat, the family's there, they have picnics, it's safe, it's welcoming. And it's an interaction, it's a cross-cultural opportunity that really removes the barriers of people accessing those places, understand safety around through a friendly face and interaction. And last year, they also put a barbecue, which is fantastic, a sausage sizzle, of course, just to be part of the culture. But last year, those sausage sizzles were served in Lebanese bread and her hummus asad sauce. So how's that for a fusion of cultures, an inclusive Aussie barbecue that is inviting and welcoming to everybody. So it was a fun day, but most important, I think, out of that is we have locals from the place that have been here for a very long time, maybe from Australian backgrounds, who are willing and wanting to be part and connect, right? That are wanting their children to come and befriend these newly arrived people. And equally, we have a newly arrived coming together. So that cross-cultural interaction, to me, that's where the magic happens, when we have everyone together. And it's not about the colour of your skin or the language you talk, it's about the doing and the sharing that's bringing us together. So, yeah, just shout out to those organisations, and we can't undermine the impact of those interactions have for that settlement, effective settlement and welcoming experience.
Allyson, this podcast is called Community Matters. Could you tell me about a person in the community that matters to you? That was my Spanish coming through. Been put on the spot. Look, I reflected a bit. I knew this was coming. I know it's on all your podcasts. Really difficult. And of course, I do have people in my life who have inspired me and that come to mind. But in the context of the work that I do, I did, when I think about the moments, those light bulb moments that happen that stay with you for a very long time. There's probably, there are a few, and it's, and I'll just kind of throw some, there's the father from Iraq who used to come to this early childhood program many years around that we needed to support, we were facilitating, and he will come in and just eat the food first. And initially it was a bit like, that comes in, family arrives, a few minutes later, what's going on? We quickly learned that it was a way of keeping the family safe. They were concerned about the food being contaminated with chemicals. Oh. They were concerned, it was a legacy of the trauma of the ward that they were coming from. So when we learn of that experience, and I always think of that as to, before we actually make any judgment and pass any judgment, it's a moment to stop, to reflect, to think, and to ask the question honestly, because there might be a reason that we don't know that's impacting those behaviours. But it also spoke of the love of that dad, the resilience, the caring for his family, despite everything that had happened. He was still there, showing up at a, parenting program of all things, to
to be part of that. But yeah, that's something that comes to mind. Another young person who she's come from Africa, landlocked country, has never seen the ocean. We're doing water safety, and she is completely scared to go to the beach. We don't see the beach that day, and I'm talking to her going, let's just give it a go, let's just take our shoes off and walk in the sand. And we did that, and then we tipped our toes in the ocean, and her face changed, the smile. And I was lucky enough to have Pia, who is a photographer, part of the comms team, and she just happened to take that photo. So it's always there's an image in my head as to we're both looking at each other, laughing at that. And that teaches me of the little moments that we give somebody and how impactful that can be. Just the joy, the happiness, that sense of belonging, and walking alongside community members to get them where they want to be. So small, it's just the ocean, but to be able to do that in many other things, I think is quite important, and that's inspiring to me. Not to forget those little things, with other people. Like, I can think of others, but I think I'm going a little bit off tangent here.
They're beautiful stories, and I love what you said. We have to walk beside people to help them get where they want to go. And I think that is the most powerful message we can leave this podcast with for the rest of the community. Walk alongside these people, and we can all go somewhere special together.
Absolutely.
Oh, thank you, Allyson.
Thank you.
That has been such a beautiful discussion. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Thank all of you for tuning in to Community Matters. Please like us, leave us a review, share, and tune in next time for more stories from the community with people who are making a difference.